All right, our last full segment with our guest, Representative London Lamar, representing the 91st District in Memphis. And I said we get right to those calls, and Jill is up next. Jill, thanks for holding. Go ahead.
Hello.
Yeah, Jill, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
So I heard that if a fetus was viable, that they would not do an abortion. Is that what I understand?
Not for this specific bill is just that after an abortion, any abortion in the state of Tennessee, the fetal remains must either be cremated or buried, and that cost is going to go to either the abortion clinic or the woman who has had the procedure.
Okay, I see. I thought there was an earlier conversation. It was hard for me to hear.
Yeah. There was a little bit of a debate about that.
We adopted an abortion survivor, and so I'm just curious as to know what happens to the baby's remains. And I know that the representative said that that's taken care of. I'm curious to know if she could elaborate on that and let us know, how is it taken care of? Is it just put in waste, or is this a repetitive statement bill? So I'll go ahead and hang up. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Jill. We appreciate it, and thank you for taking the step to adopt. I think that's incredible. But again, this goes back to the argument over whether this is human life or considered medical tissue, fetal tissue, and just like any other medical tissue during a surgical procedure, there are specific biohazard waste steps that must be taken by law, environmentally and whatnot, correct, prior to this bill?
Yes, there are already steps in place. You're exactly correct.
Yeah, okay. But again, that's where a lot of the core of the argument, some people say, no, it's not medical tissue, and it should, that's why they support the bill, and others do not. So that's the core of it. Jill, thank you.
Rely on the doctors and the science.
Yeah.
There are medical companies, there are doctors. It's been highly vetted. If it was wrong, it wouldn't be in place in the first place. There's, ethics standards that is placed on our facilities in our medical industry.
All right, let's go back to the phones and welcome in Cheryl. Hi, Cheryl. Welcome to Open Line.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to respond to her examples that she gave to justify women who have abortions, like incest, rape, medical death, or what have you. Yeah. And I wondered what data supports that. Are there some stats that say the majority of abortions are attributed to that, or is it still a higher number for women who just really don't want to be inconvenienced, or they're just not ready? What are the stats on that? My understanding was that is a small percentage, the examples she gave, versus. So I wondered, is there new data out there to give those statistics? And then when they said 23 months is the
23 weeks,
23 weeks. Oh my goodness, I'm thinking of an elephant. But anyway, 23 weeks. My understanding is an infant is fully developed and can live, but the only thing not fully developed are the lungs. So I just question, if they're going to consider it fetal tissue, should there be earlier?
Right? Yeah. That's a good point. Good point, Cheryl. Let's listen in. I appreciate the call.
Thank you for your question. To unpack, part of her question was the data. When you have an abortion, they don't ask you what your reasoning is, if I'm not mistaken. So there's not really an official count of, why women seek out. We can only go based on the women who do decide to reveal their personal information and their personal story. And so as a woman who worked in reproductive justice work, which is work that is going to allow women to make complete decisions about their work and their body, I've come across lots of women who had to make that decision because they were victims of rape or incest. And so you don't know officially how many of these women, because that's a violation of their rights unless they choose to tell you. And that's not something they ask when you go have an abortion. But what this law does is it does not make an exception for those individuals who are victims of rape or incest to be able not to have to take on that additional financial, mental, and emotional burden. I'm just a believer that, again, I think life is precious. I encourage all women, if they can, to have their children, but I respect the law of the land, which is Roe v. Wade, and women have the ability to make their decision if they need to, regardless of what that reason is.
One of our callers earlier, Representative, mentioned who was against this bill, didn't like the idea, mentioned she thought it was a waste of money and that there's going to be potentially legal challenges down the road. I know this bill is based on a similar law. Many other conservative-leaning states have passed similar laws. Indiana was one. What's your concern about legal challenges and the cost to the state?
You know, many parts of this law were struck down in Ohio already, just a couple of weeks ago. So this isn't the first time we push an abortion bill that has been struck down in a court system. Again, that's why I made the statement that this is a political agenda or a political football. We should not be playing with women's reproductive choices in legislation like this, knowing it's going to get struck down potentially in the court system. That is a waste of administrative funds. That's not being fiscally conservative, knowing we're going into fights that you're not going to win. Roe v. Wade is the law of the land. These type of bills have been challenged in court, and the courts have spoken that this is not right. So what we need to do is focus on, instead of spending money on lawsuits trying to push bills to make a statement about women who decide to exercise their choice, we need to reallocate that funding to invest in programs that's going to make sure more women are having safe and healthy babies. As someone who also represents a predominantly African-American district, Black women in Tennessee are 3 times more likely to die than any other race of women when it comes to childbirth. And our infants are 3 times more likely to die than any other race of children in this state. We have an infant and maternal mortality problem in Tennessee. And if we really want to talk about preserving life, let's talk about preserving the life of the women who are dying as a result of pregnancy, or whose children are dying because they are not receiving the dignity and the medical care they need to have happy and healthy pregnancies.
In fact, I want to mention, as far as legal challenges, the controversial legislation that Governor Lee signed into law a year or 2 ago, really making Tennessee one of the strictest states when it comes to abortion and access to abortion, was almost immediately blocked and challenged in court. Is that right?
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely. It was. Again, that's why it goes back to, this has happened time and time again, where we push this abortion argument, this abortion fight, and we lose in the courtroom. That's not being fiscally responsible. These are political statements. Again, making sure women have the ability to access this service is not being anti-life. It is being pro the Constitution and being able to empower women to make the best decision for themselves and their family. Every woman cannot have a child. Literally cannot have a child. That is the reality of the situation. So the fact that we're continuing to make this service harder for women who really truly need to access this healthcare service, to me is unfathomable. But I thank God for the judicial system to make sure that we are respecting the Constitution, we're respecting women's right, and regardless of what my Republican colleagues or our governor puts in place, these things are going to not hold up in the courtroom, and women are going to be able to continue to access the services that they deem they need for themselves and their family. So I do expect this particular bill to be struck down in a court system.
All right. Listen, we have one more minute left before we say goodnight, and I'm just going to kind of broaden out a little bit and ask you, as the session is wrapping up and as you move into the next, for legislators, usually is summer session and all of that, as you look forward to that and the next session next year as we're coming out of the pandemic, what's your biggest hope for Tennesseans?
Well, my biggest hope is that Tennesseans, we can come together and make it through this pandemic. Even though the state is opening up, I want to encourage everyone to mask up, and we're going to continue to advocate for resources that are going to put our state back on track. That's going to encourage people to make sure they have the necessary services and they can get back to work, that our children have the resources and the funding to catch them up during this learning loss, but empower our teachers and keep them safe to make sure that our children are getting the resources and the education they need to make this state a world-class state. And most importantly, we want to make sure we are coming up with substantial criminal justice reform, because our state prisons are overpopulated with nonviolent offenders, and we can do more to make sure we're doing right by citizens. So again, I plan to work with my colleagues over the summer into next year around making sure Tennessee continues to have strong schools, healthy families, and safe communities, and we are not getting bogged down into fights such as this that are going to challenge the constitutionality of women being able to access abortion services. But we can use that money to make sure our families and our babies are happy and healthy.
Representative London Lamar, thanks for your time. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to talking with you again soon, okay?
Thank you.
All right, you have a good night, and we're going to wrap things up right after this here on Open Line. We hope you'll stay with us.